Hi everyone, my name is Peter Thompson and thanks for joining me at the Amplified Warm-Ups YouTube channel. This is going to be a longer video, but one that I hope applies to a lot of different band programs and band directors. I'm a middle school band director, but this is not just for middle school and younger. This is for high school and maybe even beyond in some cases. And I feel like I can say that because these ideas don't really come from me. They're from some of the best band directors we can learn from. Before we begin, I've created an outline for this presentation, which will also include some ideas that I might forget to share in the video. So you can get that at amplifiedwarmups.com/guide. We're going to talk about designing a fundamental strategy that works for you and your band program and fits your specific situation. I'm going to offer some of the things that work well in my band program, but mostly I want to present some questions to you that will get you thinking about what's going to work for you. Before we get into it, let's first make sure that we're on the same page with what we're talking about, because different band directors have different names for this sort of work. You might call it the warm-up or your routine, maybe simply just working on the basics. Maybe you call it your fundamentals block. I call it the fundamental sequence with my band. But regardless of what you call it, we're talking about exercises that happen outside of the repertoire meant to build and develop skills in your band. You can certainly develop skills within working on the literature, but we're talking about exercises that pull out the various building blocks that make your band play well and focusing specifically on those. I want to ask you also, where are you currently with your fundamentals? Maybe you're already making a significant investment in this kind of work and it's already paying off. Maybe you're just looking for an idea or two to refine your current approach, and that's cool. I'm glad that you're watching. Maybe you're doing some work, but you want to improve the effectiveness of what you're already doing. Maybe you feel like you should do more with this kind of work, but you don't really know where to get started. I have some ideas to help you out. Maybe you feel like you're not interested in doing this at all. Maybe you just want to get into the music and you can develop whatever skills that way. I hope to offer some things that might convince you that some of this work would be actually really helpful to you. It's important to really think about why you would invest time in fundamentals. There are lots of different reasons, and some might fit you more than others, but you can develop more complete musicians when you really break things down and work on fundamentals. You can achieve a higher performance level because you'll develop the ability to learn music faster with your band. You'll be able to learn more music, or perhaps you're interested in playing more difficult music. I found that as I've started to focus more on fundamentals, it's improved my own musicianship. One really important idea is that it helps all students improve. Sometimes when we put the literature in front of the band, there's just so much that students have to process that some students kind of get left behind, but fundamentals and breaking it down to the simplest terms make sure that every student has a foothold in what we're doing and has an opportunity to make improvement. Overall, it's just going to build a better band. So fundamentals are really helpful for that. What skills are we talking about? And I think this could vary quite a bit based on you and your situations. You want to think about what's important to you. Are you interested in playing really difficult music? And so maybe you want to really dive into a lot of technique work and scales and that kind of thing. Maybe you're interested in playing more expressively with your band. And so maybe you want to focus on dynamics or phrasing and getting that into chorales and that kind of situation. Whatever you do, I've found it to be really helpful to be very definitive about what are the skills that we're trying to improve, because that provides the framework for your fundamental strategy. So if you can clearly list out the fundamentals that you are interested in improving, that will provide the structure for what you want to do. What I have done is simply adopted the framework that somebody else has provided. This is from Robert Herrings, who teaches in Leander, Texas, and he uses an acronym TARTS, and he calls it Sweet Tarts. I've developed it into something involving Pop-Tarts because I found something for the pop part that makes sense as well. But these are representative of the musical fundamentals that his band wants to go after. And if you look up Henry Middle School band performances on YouTube, you're going to see some pretty amazing playing. But TARTS stands for tone and intonation, articulation, rhythm, technique, and style. So those are the fundamentals that I've adopted with my band. And these are also in order that we want to teach them. It's not necessarily that they're in order of importance, because tone first is a pretty widely accepted method of teaching, but I've had a colleague push back on that and say, well, is it really more important than rhythm? Because without rhythm and a strong sense of when you need to play something, are you going to be able to confidently project the kind of tone that you need. And I agree with that. I think that's a very valid point. I do think that this is maybe thought of best as chronological order. I think that we do need to teach tone first, and we need to add articulation close behind that, and then we need to put some rhythm behind it. And to me, those three are kind of the big three. It's not that technique and style aren't important. They are very important, but we need to establish those first three as really solid. So the rest of the video is going to kind of be built around this framework and isolating, what can we do to specifically develop these components. Another question that's important to consider is how will you develop fundamentals in your large group versus your small group? Because some things might make more sense to develop at a rehearsal or an ensemble level versus an individual or like instrument type of grouping. Our program uses some things that I've developed called amplified warm-ups and amplified instrument routines. Amplified warm-ups is a really important part of our rehearsals fundamental strategy because it means that the first 5 minutes of rehearsal are always going to include some quality, consistent fundamentals work. And it can happen whether I'm up in front of the band or if I get pulled in a different direction. Because it has an audio track that you just press play, it has a 1 minute countdown, which gets students in their seats, and then it leads them through all the lines of their warm-up. So it just ensures a consistent quality start where they're getting solid fundamentals work in every rehearsal. On the other hand, for our lessons, we have like instrument groups, and this is a great place to really kind of focus in on instrument-specific skills. And that's why I've developed amplified instrument routines that kind of take that accompaniment track and format from the rehearsals and applies it to like instrument groups. So here's where we can really dive deep into instrument-specific techniques, fingerings, range development that's specific to that instrument, and all the things that need to go into that kind of work. So you can check that out at amplifiedwarmups.com, whether you need something for rehearsals or for your lessons. This can be really helpful to you. So moving on, we're going to talk about tone. So my question here is, if someone observed your program for a week, what kind of priority would they see placed on tone? I think it's super important. We need to have work that allows students to kind of remove the other complications from what they're doing and focus just on making a quality sound. And there are lots of things that we can do to invest in good tone. First of all, we need to start with good breathing. And this can take on different formats. A simple exercise you can do is just have the band breathe in for a certain number of counts, breathe out for a certain number of counts. We've done it different ways. We've done it breathing in through the knuckles, where you should hear the wind rushing past the knuckles. It also provides some resistance, and then they blow out for a certain number of counts. We've also started using breathing tubes, which are just 1/2-inch PVC pipe cut into about 2.5-inch lengths, and they put those in between the teeth, and that really helps them to feel how open they should be when they breathe. But anyway, teach your students how to take a full breath that's nice and open. Another thing that we've started doing more and more is singing. And this is just, really helpful to help them feel that resonance and help them to feel the pitch. And we'll get into that a little bit more in the next topic. But we do a fair amount of playing on mouthpiece and mini instruments. So brass on mouthpieces helps to audiate the sound, get their chops going. Also mini instruments for woodwinds. So like flute head joint, clarinet, mouthpiece, and barrel. Saxophone on the mouthpiece only, actually. This is really great for embouchure formation because when you play those miniature parts of the instruments, they should sound a specific pitch. And if they're getting the right pitch, that tells you that they're probably on the right track for good embouchure formation. And if it's a little bit off, it gives you some clues about what they need to do. So very helpful there. We also do long tones in various formats like Remingtons. We have some other resources that we use as well. Unison work is really important. So starting with concert F, which is a good kind of middle of the range note for a lot of instruments. And one quick note is that whenever we do unison work on a concert F, I have the horns play whatever note the trumpets are playing. So if the trumpets are playing their G concert F, then I have the horns play a G, which is their concert C. So that creates an open fifth sound, but allows the horns to be in a more comfortable range and do that kind of work. If we can focus in on unison work and just getting that resonant, balanced, blended tone that's in tune on that one pitch, then we can expand out from there. You've probably heard a lot of band directors saying you need to do a lot of work with chorales. And I think chorales are great, but before we get to that, I think that we should not sleep on good unison work. It's a very powerful thing. We need to get unison sounding good before we expand out to anything more complex. And then this is more advanced thing, but listening for the overtone. The basis is if you play a note that's really resonant and in tune, you're going to be able to pick out that note that's an octave plus a fifth above the fundamental. So that's a more advanced thing, but if you can even just aim for that, like put that on a drone and have your band play to that, that can be a really helpful thing. Intonation. Do you believe that your band can play with good or at least improved intonation? And the way I approach this is my band, and I teach primarily an 8th grade band, we're never going to get things perfectly in tune. But if we do work toward this, it's going to make the pitch a lot better. And my philosophy is I'm going to throw everything that I can at intonation. There's not just one way that I'm going to do it. I'm going to do every possible approach. So we do use a lot of drones. I have them built into my warm-up and my instrument routines. We use a harmony director as much as possible. That's kind of like it's kind of like a metronome, but for pitch. So just like a metronome provides an audible reference point for being in time, the drone provides an audible reference point for being in tune. So we use a lot of drones. I also am a big fan of using individual tuners. I know that not everybody is, but I think these are great. I heard this on a podcast recently. I think it was called the Culture Before Content podcast. They said like a tuner is like the answer in the back of a math book. You know how you do your math problems and you do all your work, and then you can check your answer in the back and see if you got the answer right. And the tuner is kind of like you want to do the work and listen for being in tune and resonant and stuff, and then you check to see if you're right or if you're off by a certain amount. So it's great for helping students tune individually. It's great for checking their pitch. It's also great for teaching them what affects pitch on their instrument, and also learning pitch tendencies, which we'll talk about in a moment. Singing is obviously very helpful. One of the things that we've done to get started with singing is we start with humming and then open up into ooh or ah, but just have them singing a concert F or singing a 5-note scale, something really simple. Sometimes I'll have them sing the numbers of the scale, like the numbers of the scale note they're playing. And we're just getting into it at a basic level with my band this year, but singing is great for helping to learn that pitch. Pitch tendencies, one, communicating to the student that not every note is going to be in tune on your instrument. It's physically impossible to create a wind instrument where every note plays in tune. And so one of the best things that we can do to develop good intonation is to learn those few notes or that are most out of tune on your instrument. Like, what are the 5 most out of tune notes on your instrument? So like saxophone, C sharp and D, trumpet, C sharp and D. Learning where those notes are and what the strategies are that we can use to adjust for them. Just or pure intonation, and this concept is not too advanced to start it fairly early. I think even with like 3rd year students, you can start to introduce some of the basic concepts of just or pure intonation. This is mostly going to come down to adjusting the major third down, and we don't have to get too specific about how far or anything like that, but get them to be aware that that third needs to come down, especially if the note that they're playing on the third is inherently sharp. So you think about a concert E flat major chord. If you have that concert G as the third that needs to be lowered, and you have clarinets on a throat tone A or trumpets on a 1 and 2 combination A, those notes are going to be sharp on their own, but then we actually need to play them below equal temperament. So teaching them what they can do to make those notes fit better in the chord, like using trumpet first valve slide or adding more fingers on the clarinet to pull that pitch down. Next is articulation, and this is something that's a little bit newer to me as far as placing a really high value on it, but it is super important. So first of all, I think the best way to work on articulation is just giving them a single pitch that they can repeat some articulation on. So concert F is a great place to start. But then communicating some core concepts to your students. So using a D syllable instead of a T syllable I found to work better. When they start a note, the attack should be mostly about the air, not so much about the tongue. It shouldn't be a super sharp, heavy tongue attack. They should think about their air more than their tongue. Tongue should always move quickly. And I'll ask students, I'll say, I've got a trick question for you. Do you move your tongue faster on half notes or on 16th notes? And they think about it, and they want to say 16th notes, but then they know I said it was a trick question, and so then we arrive at, well, we need to move our tongue quickly no matter how long the note is held out. So whether it's a long note or a quick note, We always need to move our tongue quickly. Also, we need to move our tongues quickly in legato passages. You've heard students start to slow down their tongue in playing legato notes, and then it just gets really strange. Anyway, so your tongue should always move quickly. Get it down out of the way of the air so you can get the tone into the note. Always move your tongue quickly. The tongue should always move up and down, not forward and back. So especially like for brass and flutes, not getting in between the teeth and touching the lips. It should stay behind the teeth. Moving up and down, reeds should be just the tip or just below the tip, but definitely not hitting the flat part of the reed. That's going to give you that heavy articulation sound. This is a big one for me. End notes with your air. There are times where you're going to need to get into other types of articulation, like in jazz. You're going to end some notes with your tongue in that style. But for most of the playing that we're doing at a fundamental level, students need to learn to end notes with their air, not their tongue. Especially when you get into staccato, it needs to be not. You do reach a point where notes are fast enough that you can't practically do that, and you do have to separate with the tongue. But as a basic fundamental level, learn to end notes with the air. And then the tongue needs to stay relaxed. We sometimes work too hard to get our air into the instrument against the back pressure of the instrument, and that we allow that to translate as more pressure, or more tension rather, in our tongue. And it doesn't do anything to help us get the air into the instrument, but we do it anyway. And so one of the tricks to learning to articulate well is learning to relax the tongue. Think about letting the air speed drive the articulation, and the tongue just gives a little bump in the path there. It's also one of the reasons why we've started to work on double tonguing as soon as year 3 with our brass and our flutes, because it helps. It has the additional benefit of helping them to relax their tongue as they articulate. All right, now this is a really important one. Do your students have a clear and sequenced way of learning rhythm? Because I think a lot of us, and we did for a long time, we kind of left this to just the method books. Method books have an inherent limitation, and that is, in order to keep them at a manageable length, you have to start stacking concepts and skills on top of each other. And so an example of what I mean by that is there's a method book that we use, and I really like it, but on one page it introduces cut time. On the next page, it introduces 8th quarter 8th syncopation. And on the next page, it introduces concert C major. So most of your band is playing with 2 or 3 sharps. But then, in order to get the review that you need on that same page, it has the Notre Dame fight song in cut time with syncopation in concert C major. And it's also, like clarinets going above the break and all that stuff. So it's a lot to do that unless you also have another system where students have a more simple way to just kind of attack rhythm and get the repetition that they need like that. The solution for our program has been teaching rhythm logically with Darcy Vogt-Williams. This is a great system. I like it for multiple reasons. One is that it's a really clear system of writing the rhythms. She presents that very well. And very specifically, there's a clear system for counting rhythms. And then most importantly, there's a lot of repetition involved. So there's a rhythm chart that starts with quarter notes and quarter rests. And then it has every possible combination of those values. And students go through it and practice counting those rhythms over and over. And then they add half notes. And then eventually it adds 8th notes. And then the dotted quarter 8th rhythm. And then syncopation and 16th notes and various combinations of 16th note rhythms. And it's just getting that repetition in there and making it as clear as possible. It's been a real game changer for our program, so I'd encourage you to check that out. My 8th graders are actually getting toward the end of teaching rhythm logically, so we will be going back to something that I used for a long time, and that is Sight Reading Factory. And this is an online utility that you can put in basically any parameters for the music, and it will generate music that students can just sight read off a computer screen or off of a projector, and that's a great utility. So I highly recommend both of these things. You should check those out. Now we're on to the second T, which is technique. And when you think of technique, what does that mean to you? What does that mean to your students? When I think about technique, I immediately start thinking about really fast passages of notes. But when I think about it a little bit more, I think technique is really about being able to play any pitch on your instrument when it's needed. So that could be playing chromatic scale passages, could be major scale patterns. It could be learning to get around different key signatures and getting those sharps and flats in there. It could be alternate fingerings and learning when they are appropriate. different instrument techniques and how to do that. I think of, as a trumpet player, I think of the third valve slide movement for D and C sharp. It's one thing to know that you should do that, but it's another thing to have gained the skill and the facility to actually do that. Same thing with tuba and euphonium fourth valve when you need to do that. And various woodwind techniques, like when should a saxophone player use B flat? When should a flute player switch between thumb keys? So those are all techniques that need to be developed. Range development is huge. So we have methods to work down to our students' lowest notes and then up as high as they can go to systematically develop that. Not wait until it shows up in the music, because often the amount of time that they have in a concert cycle is not enough to actually develop that next note that they need to play. So having range development and these other things as part of our technical development that we work on consistently in rehearsals and lessons is really important. And then our last fundamental is style. So do you believe it's worthwhile to work on style outside of the repertoire? And this is one I kind of have to think about, because I think that a lot of the work that we do for style is within the context of the literature that we're playing. But there are also some skills I feel like that we should be working on because there's so much that goes into doing that well. The first one that I think about is forte piano crescendo. When you think about what it takes to do this well on an ensemble level, it's a really complex thing, because you have to play a note loud and then immediately play it soft and maintain good tone and pitch and balance within the band. And then you have to crescendo it and make sure we're crescendoing at the right rate. We're letting the low instruments lead it and then maintaining pitch as we do. There's a lot that goes into this skill, and it shows up at really early levels of band. So this is something that I've built into our daily warm-ups and make sure that we're practicing and developing this skill in the background so that when we need it in the music, it's not going to take as much to get it ready. Accents are really important to do well. Are we doing them with air as opposed to tongue? Starting with air and then tapering it off. Are we learning to do it without scooping, especially on the reeds? So that takes a lot of practice to develop that skill as well. Staccato is another thing. Are we ending it with the air or the tongue? And when do we switch between the two if we're getting into faster staccatos? Phrasing, and I think this is a great place to put in some chorale work, where we can talk about phrasing as not only a component of when we breathe, but how we shape phrases and what are the things that go into that. So this is a great place for some chorale work. So there's a lot of places where you could start, and I imagine that hopefully that as we talked about these things, some things probably resonated with you a little bit more than others, and that might be a great indication of where to start. I would love if you'd start with amplified warm-ups and amplified instrument routines. But another great place to start, if you want to just kind of keep things simple, is just start working on rhythm. And here's why: because rhythm is really important to being able to play out confidently with a good tone and articulation. To start on a concert F, this is kind of like 3 exercises in one. As you work on rhythm, you're also working on tone and you're working on articulation. So just in that one context of working on rhythm, you can also work on these other things, and it's a very efficient sort of exercise. Another really important question is, are you willing to go slow? How slow can you get away with? Because as you're doing this fundamental work and building the foundation, you want to make sure that you're doing it right. And we always talk in our program about we want to go slow now so that we can go faster later. It will enable you to go a lot faster later if we're willing to invest the time in the fundamentals now. You might feel like you don't have the confidence or the credibility to go slow right now. And that's legitimate, because until you have that confidence, you're not going to be able to get your students to go with you. So I think the solution is go a little bit slower now. You can get away with that. And then as you do, you're going to see that it works, and it will build your confidence. Then as you're more confident, then you will gain credibility with your students. And that in turn will enable you to go a little bit slower yet. You'll gain more confidence as you see that it works, and then you'll gain more and more credibility. So you'll get into the cycle of being able to build a more and more solid foundation all the time. You want to think about how much time are you willing to devote to fundamentals work. It might be a lot more than you do now, okay? And it's going to depend on you. It's going to depend on the level of your band. It's also going to depend on where you are in your concert cycle, because Earlier in the concert cycle, as you're just starting to learn the music, it's a great time to invest a little bit more in fundamentals. And then as you get closer to the performance, you probably want to focus more on your rep. So when you're starting out at the beginning, you might spend 2/3 of your rehearsal time or even more working on fundamentals. And then as you go halfway through, maybe you cut that down to about 40%. And then toward the end, when you're getting those last few rehearsals before your concert, maybe you're just doing a few minutes to get the warm-up happening, and then you get onto your rep. But be willing to spend a really high percentage of your time doing fundamentals, especially at the beginning of the year and the beginning of any concert cycle. So if you've been doing this work for a little while, the question you might ask is, how can you refine what you're already doing? And there are a number of ways you can do that based on where you are. One, you might evaluate your materials. What's working well? What do you feel like you might be able to improve, or something that you need to get to supplement what you're already doing? That's a valid question. How can you create more efficient transitions in your fundamentals time? And this is where I'm at right now. So I'm just trying to communicate with my students, this is what we're going to do, this is what you need to have out, so we can move quickly from one thing to the next and do more without it eating up a ton of rehearsal time. You might try recording your rehearsals, because there's always so much coming at us and it's impossible to take it all in the moment. But if you record, you're going to hear how well, or where there's room for improvement in doing your fundamentals. And that recording won't lie, and it'll give you some great insight into how it's really going. And then this is where I aspire to be at some point, is how can I really empower students to take charge in this time, whether they're leading the fundamentals time from the front in some aspect, or they're leading the assessment part. So I can just ask them, what are you hearing? What's going well? What do we need to improve? How are we going to do that? And empowering students to kind of take charge and take responsibility for what they are performing and what they're hearing. So I know that's a lot of things to think about. It's taken me years to get to where I, feel like I'm kind of on top of a fundamental strategy in my band. So it's not going to happen overnight, but get started with something, and whatever resonated with you most, or maybe you feel like the greatest sense of urgency for, get started with that. Remember, if you'd like to get the outline of what I presented here, which also may have a few other ideas that I didn't present in the video, you can get that at amplifiedwarmups.com/guide. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you soon.